Leave now or you'll be fined. That was her opening line, my introduction to the neighborhood, while I was lugging boxes into my new place. Sweat running down my forehead, tape clinging to my hands, and suddenly I'm being told to get out of the house I just bought. Day one, not a welcome, not even a hello. A flat-out threat. She shoved a binder at me like I'd been drafted into some cult I never signed up for. And the harder she pressed, the more obvious it became. Something here was seriously wrong. What would you have done? Because I just stood there, stunned. Moving day was supposed to be easy. Load the truck, drive across town, unload. That was the plan. But the universe loves a good curveball. And mine showed up in the form of Paula Hargrove, polished blazer, folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Striding into my garage like she owned the place, I was balancing a box labeled kitchen. Fragile when she appeared at the entrance. She didn't even walk up the driveway like a normal person. No, she planted herself right in my path, some self-appointed guardian of suburbia. Her face carried this strange mix of authority and panic, which instantly put me on edge. "Excuse me, are you the new resident?" she asked. Except it wasn't really a question, it was an accusation wrapped in forced politeness. "Yeah, that's me." "Evan Carter." I tried stepping around her, but she moved with me, blocking the way. My box was digging into my arms, tape strings dangling from my fingers. "I'm Paula Hargrove, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to address your compliance status right away." She thrust a paper at me so hard I had to choose, catch it or save the box. I chose wrong. A cast-iron skillet inside clanged against the concrete, the sound booming like a gong through the garage. She lit up like she'd been waiting for that. Exactly the problem. Noise violations, disorderly moving. "If we don't preserve standards, this community falls apart." I bent down for the pan, and when I came back up, she was holding out a massive blue binder as though it were scripture. "Welcome packet. Compliance manual. 30 days to review and sign, or we start fines at $50 a day." I took it, surprised at the weight. The thing was heavier than a college textbook. Flipping through, I found single-spaced rules on everything. Grass length, mailbox placement, even approved house colors. "This binder's thicker than a bridge manual," I muttered. She nodded like I'd complimented her. "We're proud of our thorough standards. Every strong neighborhood depends on structure." "Show me where my deed says anything about your fines," I shot back, still skimming the endless pages. Her eyes blinked rapidly. She clearly hadn't expected resistance. "Your deed doesn't matter. Ownership comes with responsibility. We've dealt with non-compliant residents before, and I won't let this community slide." The way she said non-compliant felt like a personal insult. I glanced at my phone. Still open to the property boundary app I'd downloaded. The red lines marking my lot didn't line up with what Paula implied. My eyes drifted to the box of chalk I'd packed for the driveway. "Interesting combo. What makes you think I'm non-compliant?" "I just moved in." Her grip tightened on the folder. "Failure to pre-register your move, improper storage of materials, and now noise disturbances. Each violation escalates. Daily fines start Monday, $50, doubling weekly." She announced it like a sentence. I ran a thumb along the pan's smooth surface. "First day in paradise," I muttered. Then louder. "Paula, maybe let's confirm whether your rules even apply to my property before you start talking about penalties." Her face turned stop sign red. "Every home in this development falls under HOA jurisdiction. That's how planned communities work." "We'll see," I said, hefting both the pan and the binder. One felt useful. The other, theater. She clutched her folder like a shield. "Mr. Carter, you don't grasp the seriousness here. Standards protect property values and neighborhood character." I was beginning to see clearly. This wasn't about grass or paint colors. It was about control, her control. The laser pointer on my toolbox caught a beam of sunlight, scattering a red dot across the wall. "I understand perfectly," I told her. "The question is whether you understand property law." Her eyes followed the dot. For just a moment, her confidence cracked, and she snapped back, though I'd already seen it, the flicker of doubt. "I'll be monitoring you closely. Mr. Carter, very closely." She spun on her heel and marched off, shooting one last glance at the laser pointer. I stood there, frying pan in one hand, binder in the other. Through the garage door, I watched her already whispering to a neighbor across the street, pointing at my house like she was building her case. I set the binder down by the chalk and pointer. If they wanted to play paperwork games, I had tools that might be more useful. The notice she'd dropped still lay on the floor. Bold red stamp, vacate. It looked freshly applied, almost too fresh, convenient. I folded it and slipped it in my pocket. This felt like the start of something bigger. 3 days later, I had my garage set up like a defense bunker. Phone open to the property app, official plat map from the county assessor pinned to the wall, laser pointer ready, box of chalk waiting its turn. Then I heard voices outside. Paula was back, leading a group of neighbors, all with clipboards and matching name tags. HOA volunteer team. They moved house to house like inspectors. At my place, one slapped a bright yellow sticker on my trash bin. Compliance Standards Reminder. Neighborhood Unity Survey, Paula declared to Mrs. Peterson, waving her clipboard like a badge. We're gathering concerns about the new residents' impact on standards. Mrs. Peterson looked uneasy. I haven't noticed anything wrong, but Paula was already scribbling. Disruption patterns emerge gradually. Early intervention is critical. That was my cue. I stepped out with my phone, boundary lines glowing on the screen. Morning, everyone. Perfect timing. You're all interested in property lines, right? The group froze. Paula charged forward. Mr. Carter, this is official HOA business. Please return to your property. Funny you say that, I replied, pulling out a folded petition I'd found in Paula's binder. Anyone want to see what she's been passing around? I held it up. Big bold title. Petition to remove non-compliant resident. Gasps. Phones out. Neighbors snapping photos. Mrs. Peterson leaned closer. She drafted this before you even moved in. Paula lunged to snatch it back. This isn't official. It's preliminary feedback, she stammered, but her voice trembled. I laid the petition flat on my toolbox under the light. The signatures looked fake. Same handwriting over and over. Looks less like community standards, I said, and more like someone inventing authority. I gestured to the plat map on the wall. Here's the official county record. Anyone's welcome to check, Mr. Peterson was first. He traced the boundary lines, compared them to the app on my phone. His eyes widened. So your property isn't in the HOA jurisdiction at all, his wife joined him, nodding slowly. The crowd thickened, people drawn in by curiosity. Paula tried to rally. This divisive behavior is why we need stronger measures. But it was too late. Evidence was louder than her voice. Lena Brooks, my next-door neighbor, stepped forward. She studied the plat map like the lawyer she was. These are official records, she said. If his house isn't inside HOA lines, then we have no authority. Paula's face cycled through anger, confusion, and panic. Authority is established by community consensus, not outdated maps. She blurted, desperate now. One of her volunteers slipped away. Another muttered, Actually, county records are the final word. I stayed quiet, letting the neighbors connect the dots. Mr. Peterson was already doing math aloud. 15 years of dues, 12 months a year. His voice trailed off. Honey, we need to check our boundaries. The volunteer team fractured, some drifting toward my garage, others peeling away entirely. I pointed at the sidewalk lettering, sloppy paint that read, Loading only. Who approved painting city property with that? Paula's clipboard shook. That was city approved, she said. But no one believed her. Really? Because it looks like someone grabbed a brush and winged it. Lena crouched, running her hand along the uneven paint. The neighbors whispered, phones out, downloading the same boundary app I had. The HOA's Unity survey had officially collapsed. It wasn't a survey anymore. It was a neighborhood wake-up call, and Paula had lost control. This meeting is finished, she declared, but by then no one was really paying attention. Her group of volunteers had already scattered, most of them gathered around the map, firing off questions about their own properties. Mr. Carter, you haven't heard the last of this. She turned as if to leave, but froze when her eyes landed on that messy sidewalk paint job again. For a flicker of a moment, her polished demeanor slipped away, and I caught something in her expression that looked an awful lot like fear. She walked off briskly, jabbing at her phone with sharp, impatient fingers. Meanwhile, several neighbors lingered in my garage, still studying the property map and cross-checking it against their apps. Appreciate the crash course, Mr. Peterson said at last, heading home. Very eye-opening. My garage suddenly felt different, less like a space for boxes and tools, more like a small operations hub. The map on the wall had done its job perfectly. Still, as I watched Paula's figure recede down the street, her phone glued to her ear, wild gestures punctuating every word, I couldn't shake the sense that this was only the opening round. That sloppy HOA loading-only stencil on the sidewalk felt like it was taunting all of us, a reminder that someone here didn't take property law or authority very seriously. A week after that garage map revelation, I woke up to the familiar rumble of the trash truck on Maple Street. Tuesday meant pickup, and I had dutifully rolled my bin out the night before, just like everyone else. Except this morning, when I peeked out the window, the truck cruised right past my house. No slowing down, no mechanical arm reaching out, just business as usual for everyone else. While my bin sat untouched, still in pajamas and slippers, I hurried outside, thinking I must have overlooked something obvious. But no, the bin was in perfect position, exactly like all the others. The difference was that everyone else's bins were already emptied, while mine stood there full and accusing, like it had been purposely ignored. That's when the wind decided to join in. Of course, plastic bags lifted from my overstuffed bin, tumbling down the street like deranged butterflies. A torn sack of coffee grounds exploded across Mrs. Peterson's pristine driveway. Another bag snagged itself in the Hendersons' rose bushes, flapping in the breeze like a white flag. I was chasing after a runaway bag when Lena appeared on her porch. "Phone already recording. This is absurd," she said, zooming in on the truck that had skipped my house. She made sure to frame my overflowing bin beside the neatly serviced ones. "They're not embarrassing you. They're exposing themselves. Who's they?" I asked, though I already had a suspicion. She flipped her phone camera to capture the company logo stenciled on the truck. "Flynn Environmental." "There," she narrated for her live stream. "Every pickup complete except Carter. HOA interference on full display, neighbors." Peeked out their windows as her viewer count climbed. The name Derek Flynn tugged at my memory, probably from some directory I'd skimmed, but route modification services sounded like nothing more than corporate jargon for petty retaliation. Scrambled to collect what trash I could, though I knew some coffee grounds were now a permanent feature of the Hendersons' landscaping. By the time I corralled everything back into the bin, I was sweating despite the cool morning air. Mrs. Peterson stepped out with paper towels, her face sympathetic. She didn't say a word, just quietly helped sweep the coffee grounds from her driveway. It was a small kindness, but it felt meaningful. When she finished, she gave me a nod that seemed to say, "This isn't on you, and we both know it." I wheeled my still full bin back up the driveway, feeling like I'd just endured some suburban initiation ritual. That's when I spotted a receipt tucked under my windshield wiper, not an official notice. Not even a flyer, just a receipt placed deliberately. The timing was suspicious. It was dated the day before. Payment for route modification services. Scribbled at the bottom in handwriting, "HOA authorization for entire street, a bold claim, given what we'd uncovered about property lines the previous week." Snapped a photo before the wind could carry it off and headed inside to call Flynn Environmentals. Customer service line. I expected to be bounced between operators, maybe getting an answer by next week. Instead, Derek Flynn himself picked up. Too efficient or too convenient? "Yeah, we had to adjust the route for HOA compliance issues," he said immediately, not even asking for my address. "Temporary suspension until matters are resolved." "What matters?" I asked, though I already had a good guess. "Property compliance violations," he replied smoothly, like he'd rehearsed it. "HOA president flagged ongoing issues that required service interruption. Can you send me the dispatcher notes that authorized this?" A pause, then the sound of typing. "Sure, I'll email them over." But like I said, this came straight from the HOA with full street authorization. That phrase stuck with me. Considering the county records, it was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Great, send the notes. And Derek, maybe double-check how far the HOA's jurisdiction really goes. Could save you some headaches later. The dispatcher notes landed in my inbox an hour later, and they revealed more than Derek probably intended. Paula had called in, claiming control over the entire street, even for homes outside the HOA. She'd handed over a list of addresses for compliance modifications. But when I cross-referenced the list against the property boundary app, half of them fell completely outside her reach. Derek had essentially let one person dictate trash service for city properties, taking her word at face value. Either sloppy management or willful blindness. Neither looked good for Flynn Environmental. I forwarded the notes to myself and created a new folder, HOA Overreach Documentation. Something told me it was going to fill up fast. By afternoon, the street looked normal again. Everyone else's bins emptied, tucked neatly away. Mine still stood at the curb, a monument to bureaucratic spite. Paula drove past twice, slowing each time to eye my untouched bin. The second time, she raised her phone, snapping photos like she was building her own case file. I waved from the garage, surrounded by my growing archive of property law evidence. She hit the gas, but not before I caught her expression. Not victory, not even smugness. More like someone realizing they might be in deeper water than they'd planned. Just before sunset, a small municipal truck pulled up in front of my house. Not Flynn Environmental this time. The workers unloaded what looked like a cluster mailbox frame, the kind used in condos or subdivisions. I stepped out just in time to notice Paula's car parked half a block away, engine running as if she were waiting to watch the show. One worker approached with a clipboard. "Afternoon, sir. We're here to install the new community mailbox cluster. You'll need to remove your current box and use the shared system." He handed me paperwork stamped and signed, official enough to look real. But the timing stank. The order was dated today, referencing a petition supposedly filed 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago I hadn't even moved in, which meant someone had been plotting this long before our first clash. They began marking spots with spray paint, assembling the cluster frame 15 feet from my perfectly functional mailbox. The trash truck stunt had been irritating but temporary. This was a permanent intrusion. Paula's car idled in the distance, and I had the sinking feeling that what was coming next would make the trash fiasco look like a mild inconvenience. The following morning, the sound of drills and voices jolted me awake at 7 a.m. Outside, the compliance crew was back, this time armed with proper tools and a full plan for ripping out my mailbox. Paula was in the thick of it, clipboard in hand, wearing a reflective vest she clearly borrowed from somewhere. The cluster frame had been assembled overnight by a private crew she'd arranged. Now, her workers were prying at my mailbox with the kind of unauthorized confidence that suggested they'd done this before. One bolt finally gave way, clanging on the pavement with the kind of metallic finality that reminded me of dropping cast iron in the garage. "Mailbox uniformity is required for compliance," Paula called out when she noticed me at the doorway. "You have 48 hours to transition or face doubled. Fines." She flashed a laminated card that looked more like a DIY project than an official badge. "All residents must use standardized systems for neighborhood coherence." Neighborhood coherence. That was a new one. I'd heard property values and uniformity before, but this sounded like creative bureaucracy at work. And who decided this requirement? I asked, walking out for a closer look. The workers were awkwardly trying to fit my old box into the cluster unit, but the hardware didn't match. "The HOA board voted unanimously," Paula said, eyes flicking away. "Really? I'd love to see those meeting minutes." She shifted uncomfortably in her vest. Meanwhile, the worker grumbled, "This doesn't fit. Wrong hardware entirely." That's when I remembered something important from my construction management days. Mailboxes aren't just neighborhood fixtures. They're federal property, protected by U.S. Postal Service regulations. Tampering without authorization isn't just a rules violation, it's a federal offense. I pulled out my phone and dialed the local post office. "Hi, I need to speak with the postmaster about unauthorized mailbox modifications at my address." The call was short, but very, very enlightening. Yes, they'd been notified because someone had called the day before, claiming the HOA controlled the mail delivery hardware. No, the postmaster had not approved any changes to individual mailbox service. And yes, he said he'd be there within the hour to inspect things himself. Paula was still wrestling with the fittings when the postmaster arrived, erect, uniform immaculate, his badge flashing in the sun. But he didn't just glance around this time. He cut through the crowd, stood squarely among the neighbors, and spoke with the authoritative projection of a judge. "Ma'am, unauthorized alteration of mail systems is a federal offense," he announced, then produced a vivid red violation notice and stuck it straight onto Paula's clipboard. The sheet fluttered in the breeze like a bright banner. A ripple of shocked breaths moved through the onlookers. Someone even applauded. Paula's vest instantly looked like a prop from a shabby show. She stopped dead, the clipboard trembling in her hands, the citation visible to everyone. Her hands trembled noticeably now. The clipboard gave a faint rattle as she searched for a reply. We were standardizing. The HOA has authority over, she floundered, trying to frame it so it wouldn't sound like meddling with federal property. Ma'am, the HOA has no authority over United States mail delivery. None whatsoever. The postmaster stepped over to my original mailbox, which had been awkwardly forced into the cluster like a mismatched puzzle piece. He inspected the mounting with the meticulousness of someone who enforces federal rules every day. This installation is completely non-compliant with postal standards. We'll need to return it to its original configuration immediately. Paula recoiled from the reach of federal jurisdiction as if it were radioactive. There must be some misunderstanding. We were only attempting to improve neighborhood efficiency, she protested, her commanding tone drained into a plea. The postmaster had little patience for efficiency theories. He cared about adherence to federal law. Sir, he said, turning to me, we'll have your individual mailbox restored to the proper configuration by the close of business today. Then, addressing Paula, he continued, and ma'am, any further modifications to postal property will result in federal charges. Am I clear? He produced an official-looking sticker marked with an eagle emblem and applied it to my mailbox with the solemnity of a ceremonial presentation. The eagle decal read, United Postal Service. Tampering with mail delivery systems is a federal crime. It acted like armor, a visible assertion that this particular box was under federal protection. Paula stared at the decal as if it might detonate. You could practically watch her register that she'd strayed well beyond her sphere of power. The compliance crew folded up their tools with astonishing speed, apparently deciding they did not want to tangle with federal oversight any longer. Paula paused a beat to regard the eagle sticker, then followed her team toward their vehicle. This isn't over, Mr. Carter, she called, but her voice lacked conviction. Federal jurisdiction has a way of reframing neighborhood quarrels. I stood in my yard, staring at my mailbox crowned by that federal sticker, feeling as though I'd witnessed a lesson in bureaucratic pecking order. The postmaster completed his paperwork and handed me a copy of the incident report. Keep this for your records, sir. And if anyone else attempts to alter your mail delivery system, call us immediately. He tipped his hat and left, driving away and leaving a palpable sense of federal authority settling over the block. The eagle sticker caught the late sun. I found myself touching the mailbox as if it were consecrated ground, and in legal terms, it now was. Hearing that sticker applied felt like having armor strapped on behind my back, a shield against future compliance drama backed by the full weight of the United States government. That night I was organizing my growing folder of HOA paperwork when headlights swept across my living room window. A truck engine cut off outside, then purposeful footsteps approached my front door. They weren't the casual footfalls of a neighbor or the measured gait of a postal worker. They were deliberate and coming straight from my house in the dark. The next morning clarified Derek Flynn's midnight visit. He'd come back after dark to retrieve the mailbox cluster equipment, apparently hoping to avoid further federal scrutiny after the postmaster's intervention. His truck had been loaded with the dismantled frame and mounting hardware, leaving no visible trace of the unauthorized installation attempt. But Derek's removal of the hardware was merely the opening scene in what became a far more calculated campaign. Around 10, Lena showed up at my front door, wearing a worried look and carrying 2 cups of coffee. "We need to talk," she said, handing me a cup and scanning the area as if checking for prying ears. "Paul has been busy." She led me to the back deck so we wouldn't be overheard. "She's been going door to door since yesterday, telling people that your non-compliance will harm everyone's home values, making very specific claims about falling property values and market instability. It felt more orchestrated than random harassment and fit my growing sense that Paula had shifted from impulsive actions to a planned strategy. What exactly is she telling people?" I asked and sank into a deck chair. "That properties near non-HOA homes always lose value. That your violations will cost everyone thousands in equity." Lena's frustration was plain. "Paula doesn't do research. She does authority and fear. But people are starting to ask questions, especially after what happened in your garage last week." Mrs. Peterson had been one of those asking. According to Lena, Mrs. Peterson had spent the previous afternoon digging into property values in mixed HOA and non-HOA neighborhoods, trying to verify Paula's doomsday predictions. She found some interesting information, Lena said with a small smile that hinted Paula's claims might not stand up to scrutiny. Looks like Paula isn't as informed about real estate trends as she pretends to be. I had an inkling where this conversation was heading. Did Mrs. Peterson say what she discovered? I asked, though Lena's expression already suggested the answer. Lena's smile broadened almost smugly. Why don't you call her and ask directly? You should also reach out to a real estate agent to get a professional view, something official to counter Paula's next visit. Because she will definitely come back, Mrs. Peterson answered on the second ring and sounded genuinely eager to share her findings. Oh, Mr. Carter, Paula's claims about property values are the opposite of reality. Homes near non-HOA areas actually appreciate faster because buyers like freedom from restrictions and lower carrying costs. There's a whole buyer segment that seeks out non-HOA neighborhoods to avoid fees and regulatory burdens. She'd found studies showing lower carrying costs, greater freedom to renovate, and no risk of special assessments for non-HOA properties, factors that can make them attractive investments. Mrs. Peterson's research confirmed my suspicions. Paula's warnings rested on assumed authority, not market data. I called 3 local real estate agents to confirm. 2 responded quickly. One even referenced sales she'd handled right in Maple Ridge that backed up Mrs. Peterson's findings. HOA properties can be harder to sell, one agent explained. Buyers see recurring fees and restrictions as negatives. Non-HOA homes generally sell faster and for similar or better prices. The third agent was explicit. I actively recommend non-HOA properties for long-term appreciation. HOA fees never decrease, special assessments are common, and deed restrictions limit value-adding renovations. Non-HOA is usually the superior investment. That afternoon, Paula was back on the street, gesticulating wildly toward my house, with the Hendersons at her side. Market research clearly shows non-compliant properties drag down surrounding values, she insisted, clipboard quivering. I stepped outside with my laptop already open. Funny timing, Paula. I just got off a call with a licensed agent. Want to hear what she said? I tapped a key and the laptop speaker filled the air. A real estate professional appeared on a video call, her face large on the screen for the neighbors to see. Non-HOA properties often sell faster and at higher prices, the agent declared. Buyers value freedom from fees and restrictions. The Hendersons leaned in. Their expressions shifted as the professional testimony cut through Paula's scare tactics. She froze mid-gesture on the sidewalk, trapped between her clipboard and a voice she could not easily dismiss. Paula's comeback was immediate but improvised. Individual agent opinions don't reflect comprehensive market dynamics. HOA properties maintain value through standardization, but everyone could hear that she was inventing this as she spoke. Really? Someone said. These agents have actual sales records from this neighborhood. Mr. Henderson asked the key question. Do you have actual sales data or just theories? Paula's shuffling. Clipboard betrayed her lack of evidence. Market. Analysis is complex and needs professional evaluation beyond simple transaction. Records? She deflected with bureaucratic phrasing. Mrs. Peterson arrived with her own research folder. I've looked into this myself, she said. County assessor data shows non-HOA properties appreciate at the same rate as HOA properties, but without ongoing fees or special assessments. Her official printouts made Paula's handwritten notes look amateur. Neighbors compared research, exchanged concerns about fees and restrictive covenants, and Paula's attempt to regain control faltered as facts trumped fear. When people began swapping numbers to continue their investigations, Paula retreated to her car. I watched her drive away, phone to her ear, gesturing wildly while steering one-handed. Beneath the frustration there was something like panic, someone running out of conventional options and contemplating desperate moves. That evening, Lena texted, "Check Paula's online activity tonight. She's been typing furiously since your data presentation. I think she's plotting something digital." 2 days later, Mr. Henderson knocked with a troubled look and his phone in hand. "Evan, you need to see this," he said, showing me what looked like a private group thread. Paula had created a group called Concern Maple Street Residents yesterday and was posting photos of my property with misleading captions. I invited him in, and we sat at my kitchen table while he scrolled through screenshots he'd captured. There was my house photographed from multiple angles, but the captions told a story far removed from the truth. Deteriorating property standards spreading to adjacent homes, one post read. Non-compliance creating visual blight that threatens neighborhood character, said another. How many people are in this group? I asked, annoyed as I read the misleading captions. 23, Mr. Henderson answered, checking the member list. But only about 3 are really commenting. Most ignore it, but the few who engage are buying into her storyline. The worst part wasn't the captions. It was what showed up when he zoomed in. The accounts posting the photos, he said, were all created last week. The same writing style, the same grammar mistakes. Send me everything, I told him, already pulling up my laptop. Within minutes, I traced 3 of the profiles back to the same recovery link, Paula's Google Drive, where the photos had originally been uploaded. Henderson whistled low. She'd manufactured fake accounts to amplify the smear. I printed the screenshots and tacked them to my garage wall beside the county plat map. Different battles, same wall of proof. When neighbors stopped by, they didn't just see property boundaries. They saw Paula's sock puppet accounts exposed, usernames circled in neon yellow, taking photographs from trespassing positions crossed a line from garden variety neighborhood dispute into possible stalking. The real shock came when I checked metadata timestamps against my own recollection of events. Several photos were timestamped at times when I'd been at work. That meant Paula had been taking surveillance photos while I was away. The premeditation transformed this from a neighborhood spat into what felt like an organized harassment campaign. I called Lena to relay the photographic evidence. Trespassing to take misleading photos is illegal, she said immediately. That's not HOA enforcement. That's stalking and invasion of privacy. Document everything. Before I could reply to her legal advice, she went on with more immediate intelligence. There's something else. I think Paula's gearing up to push this even further. What do you mean, escalate? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear the reply. Paula's pattern of escalation had gone from excessive paperwork to altering property without permission to outright violations of federal rules. What came after sneaking photos on private land? She'd posted in her group the night before, calling for emergency community action and final compliance measures. It read like she was preparing for some kind of direct showdown. That afternoon, while I was in my garage sorting evidence files, Mrs. Peterson hurried over, her phone in hand. She's calling for an emergency neighborhood meeting tomorrow night, she said, showing me Paula's latest post from her private group. She wants everyone to sign a petition to protect property values through community enforcement, but the wording made it obvious. Paula was trying to frame this as an official neighborhood action. The petition language sounded polished and reasonable, but it deliberately avoided the real issues. Phrases like community standards, property value protection, and neighborhood harmony filled the text, but there was no mention of actual property boundaries. HOA limits or federal postal authority. In reality, Paula was asking neighbors to give her authority she didn't legally have. Without ever admitting that fact, are people actually planning to go to this meeting? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Mrs. Peterson gave a grim nod. She's been calling people directly, telling them your refusal is putting the whole neighborhood's investment at risk. People get scared when it involves their homes. Fear was a powerful motivator. That evening, I prepared like I was heading into a trial where I'd be both defendant and prosecutor. Paula had her arsenal, misleading photos, property value scare tactics, carefully worded petitions, but I had something stronger. County property records, federal postal documentation, expert real estate opinions, and proof of her trespassing photography. The next morning brought a twist. Derek Flynn's truck was parked in Paula's driveway, and the two of them were in a heated discussion. I couldn't hear from my kitchen window, but Derek's gestures toward my house and Paula's repeated head shaking made it clear it wasn't casual. After 20 minutes, Derek drove off, but not before stopping in front of my house to stare at my federally protected mailbox for a long, deliberate moment. Paula stayed outside, phone to her ear, cycling through what looked like tense conversations. Something was brewing for that night's emergency meeting. By afternoon, word had spread beyond Paula's private circle. Neighbors I barely knew were asking about the dispute, the HOA's jurisdiction, and the mailbox incident. Opinions were split. Some backed community standards, while others worried about Paula's increasingly extreme tactics. Lena stopped by around 5 with coffee. "Whatever happens tonight, stay calm and stick to the facts," she said. Paula's getting more desperate every time she fails to gain control. Desperation leads to mistakes, and mistakes expose the truth. She wasn't wrong. Every escalation had been more dramatic and less defensible than the one before. As the sun dipped, I gathered my files, preparing for what felt like a neighborhood referendum, property rights versus imagined community authority. The metadata from her trespass photos was going to be especially damning. Walking to the community center, I noticed Paula's car already there, alongside several others from the street. Her private group campaign was about to spill into public confrontation, complete with petitions and peer pressure. But then I saw something unexpected. A city truck pulling into the lot, the driver holding what looked like official documents. Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Paula had arranged chairs in neat rows facing a podium, as if she were giving a lecture instead of hosting a neighborhood discussion. She stood at the front with her clipboard, handouts, and flip charts. Around 15 neighbors had shown up. Not huge, but not insignificant. The split was obvious. Her supporters sat near the front, skeptics in the middle, and the undecided lingered near the exits. "Thank you all for coming to address this urgent matter in our community," Paula began, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had been wearing thin lately. "We're facing unprecedented challenges to our neighborhood. Standards from a property owner refusing to comply with established guidelines." She gestured subtly in my direction. She started flipping through poster boards of her so-called evidence until a uniformed officer walked in. He held up a document. "We've received a report that someone here has been filing false complaints under HOA authority," he announced. Scanning the room, when his gaze landed on Paula, whispers rippled across the crowd. Mrs. Peterson leaned toward me. "That's the same deputy who warned her about abusing 911 last month." The timing was devastating for Paula. The officer walked to the front, tapped her stack of charts, and said, "These don't match county records." Gasps spread through the room. Paula's visuals fell apart quicker than her composure. Mr. Henderson stood abruptly. "Where's the actual sales data, Paula?" "The agents Carter contacted gave us numbers that don't match these," her reply stumbled out. "Individual opinions don't capture full market dynamics. This needs community action." It sounded more like excuses than analysis. She moved on to the petition, full of vague language about protecting values and preserving character. She passed the clipboard to the front row of loyalists, but when it reached the middle rows, people hesitated. They actually read it. They asked questions. Mrs. Peterson raised her hand. "What authority does this petition give, and to whom?" Paula's answer exposed the flaw in her campaign. It grants the community authority to enforce standards that protect property values, but she didn't have that authority, especially not over properties outside the HOA. Community authority over non-HOA homes? Lena called from the back. "What's the legal basis for that?" The room went silent. "Legal technicalities shouldn't override community needs," Paula said at last, but her voice had lost its edge. That's when Mr. Peterson stood, folder in hand. "Actually, legal technicalities are exactly what matter. Property law isn't optional." He began reading from his research, showing that non-HOA homes in the area appreciated as well as, or better than, HOA ones. The petition stalled, pages drifting across a chair as people passed it without signing. Lena raised another point. "Paula, can you explain why your photos of Mr. Carter's property were taken from inside his yard while he was at work?" "The metadata shows trespass." The silence this time was heavier. Paula tried to deflect. "Compliance documentation requires thorough assessment from multiple angles, but everyone knew the difference between public photos and trespassing." The petition never recovered. Most neighbors declined to sign. Mrs. Peterson finally said, "Maybe disputes like this should be resolved through proper legal channels instead of pressure campaigns." Heads nodded around the room. Paula's supporters shrank back. Even her strongest allies seemed uneasy after the trespassing revelations. Her closing plea about protecting investments fell flat. I left with my files largely untouched. The community had reached its own judgment. As I stepped outside, the city truck was still parked. The driver stood at the entrance with municipal paperwork. "Mr. Carter?" "I'm with Planning and Development. We've had reports of property boundary disputes. We'll be conducting an official survey tomorrow morning, if that works for you." I glanced back through the window. Paula was still inside, on the phone, gesturing frantically. The next morning, 2 city trucks, a surveyor's van, and an official arrived promptly at 8. They unpacked equipment with calm efficiency. Paula appeared in her driveway, phone glued to her ear, watching anxiously. The crew worked like clockwork, tripods snapping open, lasers cutting through the haze, bright orange stakes hammered into place. Each thud redrew the truth on the ground. The planning official handed me a laminated certificate stamped with municipal seals, boundary verified. Outside HOA jurisdiction, neighbors snapped photos as if it were a trophy. The crew capped it off by sinking a permanent metal post with a plaque reading, "Survey completed." Outside HOA area, cheers broke out. A kid on a bike circled past, chanting the words. Paula didn't just lose paperwork that day. She lost the street. That sign became a permanent reminder that law outweighed neighborhood politics. Later, word spread that the HOA board held an emergency session. Paula was stripped of her presidency and held personally liable for her actions. She was fined $700 for violations ranging from postal tampering to unauthorized signage. Derek Flynn lost his HOA contract for enabling her without proper checks. Mrs. Peterson came by with cookies and an apology. "I should have questioned her sooner. Property law exists for a reason." Paula made one final appearance, hauling boxes from the former HOA office. She paused at the new boundary post, staring at the municipal plaque. "Maybe I got too caught up in enforcing standards," she said softly. Boundaries do matter. The chalk lines faded, but that bright orange sign stayed, a quiet but undeniable declaration. After all the noise, the shouting, and the binders, the truth came down to 3 things: a hammer, a map, and the law. You don't have to out-yell a bully. You just have to document better. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, or tap the thanks button to keep these stories going.